All right, guys and gals, it is an exciting time of year for me. The brand new Hoyt just showed up, and I'm excited to get the new RX-4 Ultra built. So I'll be pulling this baby out of the box, and I'll be adding my accessories here in the next few days. And I hope to take you through the process that I go through to get this thing set up, and just kind of give you a review of the bow after we get shooting. It'll kind of be in the next coming weeks, so it'll be piecing the film together a little bit, but I'm excited to get it together. I'm excited to get to shooting, and we just have about a month and a half until the Kansas archery turkey season opens. So of course this bow will be in action on turkeys. So last year was really good, had a good successful year, and excited to give it another try this year with the brand new Hoyt. So again, looking forward to get it together and sharing with you guys what all I use, the equipment, what kind of steps I go through, and we'll get to shooting pretty soon. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is mount my arrow rest, and I'm really liking the idea of this new rest system or mounting system that QAD came out with. They teamed up with Hoyt and created the new Integrate MX. And this rest will actually mount on a rail style mount on the back side of the riser. So it'll allow for a lot more structural type hold, and it should be locked to where it'll never move once I get it set. All right, now that we got our arrow rest mounted, the next step I like to take is to make sure that I have a perfectly 90-degree angle with my arrow so that I can tie in my nocking points. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my arrow on the string, and then I'm going to put it on the rest, and then I'm going to make sure that the bow is level vertically, and then I'm going to make sure the arrow is level horizontally so that it makes a perfect 90-degree angle. At that point, I'll go ahead and mark the top and bottom of my nock, and then I'll go ahead and tie in my nock sets after that. All right, before we tie our nock sets, I wanted to mention something that's extremely important and something to really take note of. Whenever you get the nocks from an arrow company, a lot of times they're fairly skinny, or obviously, you know, a preferred size from that arrow manufacturer. The one thing to pay attention to is if you happen to switch over to like a nocturnal lighted nock or a luminock or something like that, if you're going to hunt with those, I would highly recommend tying your nock sets for the exact nock that you're going to use. And I know that sounds very obvious, but a lot of people, including myself, have made this mistake in the past to where you get a preferred nock and you practice all summer and leading up to a hunt, and then maybe you have a couple of lighted nocks in your quiver, and not realizing it, you slide that lighted nock in, and it might be a little bit thicker when you clip that on. And so then you have a tighter fit, which in turn ends up making like a nock pinch at full draw, because that string angle comes in tight and it pinches on that thicker or heavier nock, and then you have flight issues if it's pinching on that. So that's one thing I'd recommend, is really checking the height of those nocks before you tie those in. What I've done is I'm going to go ahead and remove the orange nock, which is the standard, it's like a boning pin nock. I've chosen to go with the pin nock because they weigh about the same as what a lighted nock is going to, right around that 16 to 18 grains or so. If you were to use the standard nock from like Victory or whatever your manufacturer is for your arrows, they're just a slide-in nock. It doesn't have the pin, obviously, and those are probably going to be around 8 or 9 grains. So I'll pull those, put in a pin, and then put in the pin nock on top of that, and that usually weighs pretty close to the same grain as the lighted nock. So some states are legal to shoot lighted nocks, some are not, so obviously check your regulations before you take a chance on that. I'm going to go ahead and put on a different pin nock than the boning one that I used to use, because the boning ones are extremely thin, and so that's where I noticed that I ran into the problem when I put on my nocturnal. So I went to a gold tip pin Nock, and that's what I'm going to try this time. My buddy Jared actually uses that one, and he recommends it because it is about the same as the nocturnal. So I'm going to go ahead and pull one of these, stick it on my string, tie a Nock set on top, tie a Nock on top and a bottom with string, and then I'm going to put my D loop on the either side of that. That way, if I ever need to switch out that D loop, I don't have to cut it and then wonder where my nocking point is at. I already have my Nock sets there in place to where that D loop is easy to retie in later on if you happen to mess that up. So I'm going to go ahead and tie these in, and I should be set to go out and start getting this thing tuned up. All right, next I'm going to go ahead and mount my bow sight, and I wanted to mention something that's extremely important, and I've already done it on this sight, but if you haven't done so, when you're mounting your sight on your bow for the first time, you want to make sure that your bow is perfectly vertical and make sure that you have a way to level that bow. And then as you tip that bow down like you were shooting downhill, you want to make sure that your sight that you mount is perfectly level when it comes to second and third axis. And that basically means that when you rotate that bow downward, if you keep your bubble level, you got to make sure that your second and third axis is on plane and on level. There are tools out there to test that. I've kind of developed my own way in my bow vise and made sure that all of my bench and everything was perfectly level, and I've never had any trouble shooting at extreme downhill angles. So anyway, just make sure that you check that and make sure that you're double checking that, especially if you're going on a high country hunt where you're going to have some steep ups and downs. All right, now that I've got my Nock sets and my D loop and my sight and my rest all mounted, the next thing I want to check is the timing. So I want to make sure that the top and the bottom draw stops are hitting the string, they're coming around and hitting the string at the same time. That way we start with 100% synchronized cams, and then we'll be able to start with a good starting point as we dial our rest in to get everything, the arrow coming out of the bow perfectly square. One thing I did do is I had to rotate the modules on the cams to make sure that they match up to my draw length. In this case, I went ahead and went with a number 2 cam, and the maximum on that number 2 cam is 30 inches. Now, my draw length is just slightly over 30 inches, so I'll go ahead and twist the cable up a little bit in order to make my draw length just a little bit past 30 inches, and I'll dial that in a little bit later after I get my Peep sight mounted. So right now, I'm gonna draw it, make sure the draw stops are hitting the same time for synchronization, and after that, we'll go ahead and put a Peep in and we'll be ready to start shooting. All right, I just got done syncing the cams. I ended up having to make a slight adjustment. The bottom cam was a little bit behind, so I had to catch it back up so that it hit the draw stop at the same time as the top cam. And so now that I got that dialed in, I'm gonna go ahead and put my Peep sight in. I'll tie it in so it's good and snug, and then I'll put my stabilizer on. And then after that, I'll be ready to head out to the shop to the paper station and try to shoot a bullet hole through paper. We'll see. All right, one thing I wanted to point out, and it's no mystery, there's a lot of people doing it this way, but how to tie in a Peep sight. A lot of people just put a knot at the top and a knot at the bottom, and sometimes, you know, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you know, in the backcountry, hunting elk or whatever it may be, I'm always leery of that popping out of my string. So I like to do the method where I start the knot on top and then I wind around the Peep sight a couple times and then on down the opposite leg to the bottom knot, and then that way everything's cinched tight together. Like I said, there's many ways to do it. Whatever works for you, go with that, but I just will show you the way that I like to do it. It's going to be kind of a sped up video just to kind of get through it fairly quickly. If you have questions or anything like that, just leave them in the comments and I'll gladly point you in the right direction or to the video that I watched to learn the method that I use. So I'll go ahead and get that tied in and get out and do some paper tuning. All right, guys and gals, just got everything finally put together, and I'll just kind of go through everything that I put on the bow, and I'm ready to start paper tuning. What my plan is to shoot a bare shaft through paper, and I'll also double check it with arrow that has fletchings just to make sure I don't have fletching contact that's going to show a tear. But I'll dial everything in pretty close through paper just to double check that I don't have an extreme tear or contact somewhere. And then what I'll do is go outside and I'll basically shoot a fletched arrow at 20 yards and then a bare shaft at 20 yards. And I'll make sure that the bare shaft is going to group with the fletched arrows. If it doesn't, if it's veering off one way or another, up, down, left or right, I'll adjust my rest slightly in order to bring that back into the group with the fletched arrows. That's pretty much what I do to get everything dialed in as far as the arrow coming out of the bow perfectly square. If I'm going to choose a fixed blade broadhead, which sometimes I do if I'm going elk hunting in Idaho or something like that, I will put a fixed blade on the front, and I'll double check that arrow with a fixed blade along with my field point or a bare shaft, just to double check that everything is still, you know, coming out of the bow the same way. It should be the same as the bare shaft just because it's going to magnify any inconsistency coming out of the bow. It's going to put wind drag on one side of the arrow or the other if the arrow is coming out of the bow crooked. So just a couple different things to check just to make sure again that it's coming out of the arrow perfectly in line. The string is directly behind the arrow and it's not shoving the arrow or the rear of the arrow one way or the other. So again, I'm going to start by paper tuning, and we'll go outside after that. All right, looks like I got a little bit of a tear, so I'm probably going to move my rest a little bit to the right, but I'm going to shoot a fletched arrow just to make sure and to kind of see the reaction of this arrow through the rest with fletchings on. All right, so I got a little bit of a left tear, not very much, it's just probably 1/4 of an inch, so I'll just do a slight left-right adjustment on the rest and try again. All right, so I wanted to show you real quick. I just have, here's the field point and then it tore to the left. Same way here, it was a little bit less drastic with fletchings. So in this photo, you can see that it's suggesting to move the rest to the right to correct that, which is what I'm gonna do right now, and we'll see if it helps me at all. All right guys, I made a slight adjustment and I just had to slide my rest to the right just a little bit. I'm gonna show you, this is kind of cool, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a micro adjust. So you loosen a set screw on this arrow rest, and then you can basically just twist this little dial on this little integrate rest, but it's really nice because it's got micro left and right adjustments. It's also got micro up and down adjustments by touching this top knob. You basically just loosen a set screw on each, the left or the right, or I'm sorry, the left, right, or the up and down. And then you can just twist that little dial and it really minutely adjusts your rest, which as most of you know, before you could make a coarse, screw adjustment or loosen it, and that rest really doesn't take much to move. So, if you move it too much, then obviously you kind of lose your spot and it just kind of gets annoying. So it's really nice that you can just do this little dial to where you know that it's not going to jump on you. So I've moved it to the right just a little bit, and hopefully that's going to be the ticket to a perfect bullet hole. All right, that's closer. We got still a little bit of a left tear, so I'm actually gonna take this, and now that I see that I don't have a major tear, I'm actually gonna go outside and start bare shaft tuning. The reason being is sometimes when I spend too much time trying to get a perfect bullet hole here, I find that I'm making a different adjustment out there when I'm tuning broadheads or bare shafts. So to me, that is more important out there, to get a bare shaft to group perfectly with a field point. And so I'm gonna go out there and start testing. And if for some reason I need to continue to make adjustments, I'm probably gonna make those adjustments with tiller tuning. I'll be tightening up one side, and then loosening the other in order to get my tiller or my limbs to lean a little bit one way or the other to take that tear out or that inconsistency out. All right guys, what I've done so far is just simply sight my bow in at 20 yards. And I'm using a couple different styles of fletching, so don't get kind of confused as to what's going on here, but I'm actually going to do some testing on which fletching configuration I really want to go with this season. But anyway, I've sighted in at 20, and then I've got a bare shaft in the arrow mix. So what I'll do is shoot a few group with fletching, and then I'll shoot my bare shaft, and I'll be able to tell if that bare shaft is veering off one side or the other, if it's sitting, you know, going into the target at an angle. That'll tell me that, you know, it's shoving the arrow one way or the other, or the rear of the arrow left or right. And that'll tell me if I need to move my rest left or right. And then we'll see what happens. All right, now I've got 3 arrows down there, and it's not a perfect 20-yard group, but it gives me a general idea. And now I'm going to shoot the bare shaft and see how it reacts to the rest of the group. Okay, so I can already tell, I see the arrow kick to the right. The rear of the shaft came left, which made the front of the arrow veer to the right. So that tells me that I need to move my rest to the right so that it's not shoving out of the arrow or out of the bow this way, or I can mess with the tiller. So I can tighten one side or the other and get my cam to lean a little bit different, and that should take that out of there. I'm probably gonna go that route just because I have my rest in a position where I really like it. I don't want to adjust my rest any farther into the riser just for fear of clearance later on. So I'm going to take the rest of the fine adjustment up by adjusting this Y cable up here. All right guys, so as I mentioned earlier, I had a left tear through paper. I also noticed that it was showing out when I was doing bare shaft tuning the same result. So the rear of my shaft was kicking to the left. So the arrow was coming out of the bow like this and veering to the right. So what that tells me is I either need to move my rest to the right, or I need to make a tiller adjustment. And what I like doing is setting my center shot or my rest perfectly down the center of the bow. So down the center of the grip, down the center of the riser, everything. After that, if anything is off, meaning the arrow's coming out of the bow off to the left or the right, I like to make tiller adjustments on the Y cable. So in this case, since I'm getting a left tear, I would want to put my bow in the press, and I would want to take the left Y off of the top limb, and I would want to tighten that by a half a twist or a twist. It all depends on how bad you think that arrow is fishtailing out of the bow. So in this case, I'm just going to try to put one full twist in and see how that reacts. And what I'm going to do is put the twist in, and I'm going to go across the road to my shooting range, and I'm going to see how the bare shafts are reacting and see how they're grouping compared to my fletched arrows. I'm hoping that this is going to take care of the problem, and I will have a perfect grouping with my bare shaft along with my fletched arrows at 20 yards. All right, as I mentioned inside, I went ahead and put a twist in the left cable of the yoke, and that should correct or help the left tear or the veering right arrow with the bare shaft. I'm going to take a couple shots with fletched arrows, and then I'll shoot the bare shaft and see if we made an improvement. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys real quick. This was the fletched arrow, so it's perfect left and right. It's just a hair low, obviously, but that's not what I'm worried about at the moment. Then you can see the angle of the arrow on the bear shaft. So obviously it's still trying to tail right, or put the rear of the arrow to the left. So it's flying, it's coming out of the bow at an angle. So what we want to do is add one more twist or a half a twist in that yoke on the top cam, and hopefully that will get the angle coming out of the bow the same as what the corrected arrow is with the fletching. Once we get that to match, then it's coming out of the bow perfect. All right guys, this is exactly what I wanted to show you that we were after. So obviously first arrow with the fletching, and then bear shaft. I took a couple trips into the press and I ended up fine tuning the left hand yoke cable, and I kept twisting it up, and I ended up finally finding the happy spot where everything was going to be just right. So what I ended up doing, I think it was probably about 2.5 twists into the left yoke cable, and now I'm having really good flight with a bear shaft. So as you know, or some of you may know, anytime you get a bear shaft to fly this good at 20 yards, you're doing pretty well. So that means that you're giving the fletchings a head start to stabilize the arrow coming out of the bow, because it's pretty well already stable. You're just speeding up that process by getting that bear shaft tuned perfectly to your setup. Now I'm going to go ahead and pretty much go back to all the distances or all the marks that I want to hit, and make sure that my sight tape is right on my CBE. If not, I'll keep adjusting that until I get the right sight tape due to the speed and arrow weight and everything. So that's my next step, is getting everything sighted in, and turkey season's about a month away, so looking forward to getting this set up. Well, good morning everybody. It is late February here in Kansas, and I'm just out for a nice morning of shooting. And I've got the brand new Hoyt RX-4 Ultra set up, and I went through the normal tuning process that I do. I set everything up perfectly level through the burger button hole, and after that I end up going left and right. I just kind of use my eyeball and try to go through the center of the bow, and that usually gets me pretty close, and it did this time as well. After that I started shooting bear shafts through paper, and I had just a minute tear, and it was a left tear actually, and so I shot a fletched arrow through and got the same thing just to make sure I didn't have any major contact with my fletchings. And after that I decided to come out at 20 yards and shoot a bear shaft alongside my fletched arrows at 20 yards. That result also showed that I had my tail kicking a little bit to the left. So I got my rest perfectly center on the shelf, exactly where I want it. And so after that, to get my tear out, or to get my tail whip to quit, I ended up twisting up this left hand yoke cable so that it put a little more cam lean in to account or override that left kick that I was getting with the tail of the arrow. After I did that, I ended up putting like 2 twists in and taking 2 twists out of the right hand side so that my cam synchronization didn't change. And after that I was shooting perfect. So it's coming out of the bow really, really nice. I was grouping my bear shafts at 20 yards, no problem. And so now I'm just out. I've shot about 100 arrows through this thing, and I'm getting really good groups. I'm sitting at 80 yards right now. I'm gonna shoot 3 arrows downrange and just kind of show you guys what kind of group I'm getting at 80 yards with this bow. So I got 3 arrows, and they're Victory VAP TKO 300 spine. And I'm shooting a 70-pound bow with a 30-inch draw. So I'm actually at the very top end of the number 2 cam for this RX-4. So again, I'm gonna shoot 3 downrange, and I'll zoom in on the target first, zoom back out, and we'll run down, and I'll never make any cuts or anything on the film. That way you can kind of see exactly the group that I got today. So I'll go ahead and zoom in. All right, first arrow. Arrow number 2. And the last one. All right, let's go see how we did. Go ahead and zoom this out. All right, we'll go ahead and walk down. It's a little bit nippy this morning. It's probably about 35 degrees, a little bit of breeze already, which is standard for Kansas. So I try to get out and beat the wind. All right, see what we got. Sit that down. All right, so as you can see, I got about a 6-inch group or so, and that's all I can ask for at 80 yards. That's usually about average for what I shoot. I'm gonna try to tighten that up a little bit after I get used to this bow. But out of the gate, this new Hoyt is shooting really, really nice. So just wanted to share with you guys the results I've had so far with setting up this bow. And I hope you liked the video. Y'all take care and good luck this season.